Does the name of Andrei Kozyrev ring a bell? Sounds familiar? It might if you're about 45 plus years of age. But if you are younger, particularly if you're a millennial, it may mean nothing to you except that it's a Russian sounding name. Now, Kozyrev was the foreign minister of Russia. Remember, Russia, not Soviet Union. In 89-90, when Soviet Union ceased to exist, out of it came Russia. He was Russia's foreign minister for 6 years, between 1990 and 1996. Now he lives a private life at Miami in the US, doing his businesses, etc., etc. What he's done today is he's written a thread on Twitter, which explains to us, which gives us an insight into Putin's mind. And he tries to answer a question or answer the question on everybody's mind. Is Putin irrational? Is he a nutcase? Is he like one of those villains in Hindi movies or James Bond movies who think they can conquer the world and who's unhinged, right? His threats of using nuclear weapons, for example, his invasion of Ukraine, where it looks like obviously he has made many miscalculations. So is he irrational? Because if he's irrational, then the equation changes. Then his threat of using nuclear weapons, if he's losing this war, sounds very real, which means it becomes like putting the gun to his own head and negotiating with the world that either you give me an off ramp, meri izzat bachao, give me something prestige saving or face saving, otherwise I'll blow my brains out and this will mess up all your living room. Then what will you do? So Kozyrev is Russian. He's worked in the system. He's been in politics for a long time. He was a member of Duma even after he ceased to be minister. Now he has written his own views, which I think are very interesting. And what I'm going to do today is that this is an ongoing war now with many battles. And this war is being fought on many fronts. Tactically, on the ground, it's being fought in the east, that is the old Donbass area, and also in the south. Now, south is the area which is abutting the Black Sea, and that is where the Russians had earlier seized Crimean Peninsula in 2014, and from there they are pushing in. They are pushing in towards Melitopol and trying to then link up with their forces coming in from the east in Mariupol, but also they are trying to go west towards the port city, the big port city of Odessa. Ukraine has about 13 seaports on Black Sea. Odessa is the biggest. Odessa also by population and importance is the third largest city in Ukraine, the largest being Kiev, the second largest is Kharkiv, and then there are three cities sort of about in a million ballpark. There Odessa is the third largest. So Russians could then be moving in that direction. So that is the tactical situation. And third is the big diplomatic stuff that's going on around the world, central to which is the calculation as to whether Putin is rational or not. Now, what is Kozyrev saying? Please see his thread. I will share his thread with you on the screen. It will run on the screen slowly as I talk, but I will try and summarize it for you with some analysis of my own thrown in. So he says, first of all, the two basic questions need answering. One, do we take Putin's threat of using nuclear weapons seriously or not? He says, my view is no. This is not a serious threat. Number two, is Putin rational or not? So again, he says, my view is that Putin is rational. Putin hasn't lost his mind. Then he says, if he's utterly irrational and people think that he's just gotten angry and he's doing all this stuff, particularly after his hour-long or hour-plus-long speech to begin with, where he said things like he blamed Lenin for the formation of Ukraine as a separate country, etc. He says, I disagree with the idea that Putin is utterly irrational. He says his actions are horrific, but they are not irrational. And he explains why he thinks these are not irrational. So he says that he has made three calculations. His calculations of invading Ukraine are based on three considerations. Number one, Ukraine's condition as a country. Number two, Russia's military status right now. And number three, the West's geopolitical situation. And he explains each one of these. Now, for the past 20 years, he says, Putin has grown believing that Ukraine is not a country, that Ukraine was never a country, it's an artificial entity. It is fundamentally nothing but Russia, an extension of Russia. So it cannot be a fully autonomous, sovereign country with its own view of its security. It can at best be a buffer state, right? In which case, Russia should have big say in its strategic and defense policy, etc. And essentially, he thought that even if Ukraine has to stay as a separate country, it should be a satellite state and nothing else. But that dream ended in 2014 after the Euromaidan protests. Euromaidan protests got rid of the Kremlin loyalists there. He was thrown out, and as he was thrown out, a new elected government came in which is not pro-Kremlin. So he thought that I can no longer covertly control a government in Ukraine because this government is more independently minded, more looking towards Europe. Remember, even the Maidan protests or Euromaidan protests that they were called Euromaidan because people then wanted Ukraine to integrate with Europe, to join the European Union, which Russia did not want. So he says that Putin thinks that this is a Nazi Bandera junta. Now, the Nazis, you know who they are. Who are the Banderas? So Banderas, a kind of political group or people of a political persuasion of extreme right wing in Ukraine, who are the followers of Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera was a politician and theorist of militant right wing in Ukraine, a Ukrainian nationalists, ultra-nationalists, and ideologists. So what Putin thinks is that Zelensky is not just any other elected leader. He is driven by Nazi and Bandera's ideology. So he's only taking on them. Now, next point, the condition of his own military. In the last 20 years, Kozyrev says that Putin has made huge investments in his military, and he's been releasing this money, and his advisors and others have been coming and telling him that, look, the military has become really powerful now, our military has got modernized. Kozyrev says it did not happen because a lot of that money ended up buying mega yachts in Cyprus for his oligarchs who siphoned out the money, but nobody was giving the bad news to Putin. His people were only coming and telling him how great his army was. Now he has realized that his military is not really prepared. It's not as good as he was made to understand it was. And in fact, you can see it in all these videos, all the pictures that are coming out, even if a lot of it is propaganda. I'm adding this, not Kozyrev. Even if a lot of it is propaganda, you can see that Russia's fighter planes are not electronically protected, nor do they have sufficient and accurate precision-guided munitions, so they can carry out their bombing from a distance or from altitudes where man-pad missiles cannot reach them and where electronics will protect them from long-range missiles. When they come low to attack, then they are brought down by man-pad missiles. And that's what's happening to Russian helicopters also. They have suffered quite a few helicopter losses. And similarly, Russian armor is suffering. They are simply not battle ready. They do not have the technological ability to deal with the missile-heavy environment. And even these anti-tank missiles that the Ukrainians are using, a lot of these are American javelins. These are all shoulder-fired missiles. So he says that it's only now that Putin is realizing that this military is not what he had imagined it to be. It's a Potemkin military. And the Potemkin example or analogy is a very cruel one because Potemkin was a Russian ship whose crew mutinied in 1905 during the Russian Revolution in the Black Sea. They bombed the port city of Odessa and then sought asylum in Romania. So he says this is like a Potemkin military, not capable of taking orders, not competent enough to organize a big war, and not equipped as well. And that is what is now showing up as Putin's weaknesses. Next, what did you think about the West? Kozyrev says that for all these years, the Russian elites, not just Putin, but the Russian elites that surround Putin, they have begun to believe their own propaganda that Joe Biden is not all there, or he's got the same issues that Donald Trump has been talking about. And several things happened which confirmed this impression in their minds about the West being weak and America not being all there. The first was 2014 when they annexed Crimea. Europeans, they imposed some sanctions on the Russians, but those are flea bites. And they thought Europe does not have the stomach to act more strongly than that. So they thought they will ride roughshod over Europe and America. And America They just saw Biden make that shambolic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they thought this is the perfect time. So this is where Putin is coming from. Number one, he thinks fundamentally, strongly, ideologically, morally, philosophically, strategically, that Ukraine is not a country. And if at all it has to be a country, it has to be under my influence all the time. Second, that my military is the strongest it's been since the decline of the Soviet Union. And third, that the West is at its weakest. So he arrived at this call to invade Ukraine based on all these three presumptions. Now, he has miscalculated on all three, but it doesn't mean that he's irrational. In fact, he's very rational. He's looked at all this. He's just gone by wrong inputs which have proven to be false now or misplaced now, but he has made his calculation based on these. So based on all these facts, Kozyrev comes to the conclusion that he is rational. And he says, you want further evidence of his being rational? That evidence actually is his nuclear threat. Don't think that he's making these nuclear threats because he's nuts. He's making these nuclear threats because he thinks that's his only leverage. So to use his exact words, so he says that even this threat of nuclear war proves his rationality, because what's he doing? He's saber rattling his last remaining card in the deck, and that card is the nukes, because he thinks it's the threat of the nukes that may force or may scare the West into conceding his demands. And of course, Kozyrev goes on to say that's the reason Western powers or those ranged against Russia should not concede their demands. They should not submit to nuclear blackmail. Now, not many countries give out threats of nuclear war. In fact, if you can see the post-Hiroshima-Nagasaki world, it's been rare that any nuclear weapons power has threatened nuclear war. Okay, there have been some standoffs, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis, some others, but nobody says, listen, either accept this or I will throw nuclear weapons at you. The only nuclear weapons power to have done it in our memory is Pakistan. In 1991, they threatened to use nuclear weapons against India, in fact, early in the war. Subsequently, Op Parakram, you remember as Op Parakram happened and India piled up its forces on the borders with Pakistan, poised for war. It looked like we would go to war at any time. This was after the parliament attack. What did the Pakistanis do? Every other day, they will launch one more missile, something called Abdali, something called Gauri, something called Ghazni, each named after some medieval Muslim invader and conqueror of India to scare India. In fact, when they were launching these missiles almost at a rate of one every couple of weeks, sometimes even faster than that, a question was asked about these missile launches in the Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson's press conference. It used to be Nirupama Rao then. And she was asked that, what do you think? Are you worried about all these missile launches? And she said, short answer, we are not impressed. So I thought those were four of the finest words spoken by Indian diplomats in that period. Now, Russia is also making the same threat. So these are threats of a weaker power which knows that it cannot achieve conventionally what it wants. So Pakistan also figured that conventionally they will not be able to withstand India because India is much more superior conventionally. They also know they can never take Kashmir through a conventional war, so they resort to nuclear blackmail. That's a rational act. Irrational would be if they use the nukes. That is how it is in Putin's case as well. That is Kozyrev's analysis. Now, tactically, we'll briefly talk about the tactical situation as well. As I told you, there is fighting in the east. Most of the coverage that we are seeing is from the east. That is Kharkiv, Sumy. Those are areas in the east. There is also a thrust coming in a little bit north from Belarus, from the Belarus side, towards Kyiv. In fact, those are the columns which have got closest to Kyiv, and that's where the big convoy is also coming in, which seems to be stalled. But that besides, there is a lot of interesting fighting and important fighting going on in the south, because in the south, Crimea was already annexed by Russia. From Crimea, they are linked with the mainland. They have a very good logistics base there, and they've been moving in from there, and that is where they have taken their first city. It's not a huge town, but a city called Kherson. So they've taken over Kherson, and from there, now they're trying to expand. They are trying to go in one direction to link up with their forces in Mariupol. That is after they take the town of Melitopol. You will see all these on the maps, and I'm using the map from the Institute of Study of War. So please see this map. Also go to their Twitter handle. It's @the Study of War. Please check it out. And these then tell you that how close the Russians are to Odessa. That is the third largest city and the largest port in Ukraine. If they take Odessa, and now what's happening with the Ukrainian forces is that they are getting very spread out. They are spread out in the east, they are concentrating in the east. They are also concentrating around Kiev because they must defend their capital city. So it looks like they are not able to send sufficient forces in the south. And there might be a situation where they might have to decide to trade territory in the south. That means even the city of Odessa to concentrate their own defense around Kiev. And as that happens, Russia may get a chance of encircling them even tighter. Now, it doesn't change one basic fact, which is that it is a war of attrition. It's a grinding war of attrition. The Russians never thought they'll fight it. In fact, almost nobody in the world thought that this will come to this. Everybody means most people thought that this will be a lightning campaign. Russians will get to Kiev, the government will capitulate. It hasn't happened. In fact, they're facing a fight everywhere. The defense by Ukrainians is quite scientific, and they are also extracting quite a high price, quite a heavy price from the Russians in terms of casualties, loss of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery. See these videos. In fact, I'll just run one for about 2 seconds as I talk. You will watch this play out also. See these videos. This is 2 batteries of Russian D-30 122 mm towed artillery. It looks like they were not using the shoot and scoot method. They were sitting in the same place and firing. And some Ukrainian drone, probably the Turkish Bayraktar, has sneaked in behind this and blown up all these guns and the entire battery. You can see what a scene this is. So Russians are taking that damage. So Ukrainians are slowing them. But if they take Odessa, things can change dramatically, and the center of gravity of the battle and the weight of the battle can shift. To understand this, there is again a 25-part thread that will run on the screen as I talk. This is a thread by recently retired Major General Mick Ryan. He's a thinking, writing general of Australian Army. In fact, his Twitter handle also, his bio says Major General just retired, Mick Ryan, and he's been putting out very good insights on what's going on. And he, in this 25-part thread, tells us of what's happening in the south. That is the area we are not focusing that much on, particularly in India also, because we don't have students there. Our students are all on the eastern side. And he says in this thread, it's even possible, and he's speculating, he says, that Russian commanders in the south are of better quality than commanders in the east. If they keep progressing in the south, where defenses seem much softer than in the east, and they link up with their forces in the east towards the north of the Sea of Azov, please look at the map. In that case, they could move towards the city of Dnipro. That's again a crucial center of logistics, supplies and things. And then he says they might be able to spare the forces. Today they are fully consumed. 95% of Russian forces which had been piled up along the borders of Kiev are now involved in fighting, 95%. So they don't have many reserves left. But if they make this progress in the south, then they can spare some forces who can then move west and try and block these areas coming in from Poland, from which all these Western supplies are coming into Ukrainian armed forces. There's also a lot of discussion on whether or when will Russia land amphibious forces on the coast along the Black Sea in the south. There are those who says it's imminent and Russia is going to do it anytime. There are those who say there is still some time, it doesn't look like it's imminent. But there are experts who say that Russia already has its 810 Naval Infantry Brigade, which are like a marine force, who are already on amphibious ships and they can land anytime. And when that happens, then Ukrainians will find it very difficult to defend Odessa and their coastal ports and cities. In fact, even here, I would refer you to a thread from Dan Lamothe, who's the Washington Post military correspondent. He gets briefed by the Pentagon every day, and he puts out these threads based on that, attributing it to Pentagon sources. And his Pentagon sources, as you can see in one of his tweets, have told him that they don't believe that an amphibious landing is imminent. So once again, look at all the conclusions. 1, that Putin is not irrational. 2, he miscalculated. To miscalculate doesn't mean you are nuts, because In any war, a game of cricket, a game of chess, one side loses. That side lost because they miscalculated. It doesn't mean that they were nuts. The second thing is that his nuclear blackmail is not to be taken seriously. He's not lost his mind, definitely not to the extent that he will risk himself going up in vapor. He's not about to do that. This is just an empty threat and should be dealt with like that. Everybody should hold their nerve. And finally, that tactically, while everybody is focused, all our attention is focused on Kharkiv and Sumy battle zones in the east and the north, a big Russian breakout could be coming in from the south, enveloping or threatening to envelop the big port city of Odessa.